So the other day I got a message on Facebook from a guy asking about using a real amp with a Helix and switching between the real amp's preamp and the preamps in the Helix. Not too difficult to do, but I thought rather than trying to explain it over a message, I'd do a video on it. Jump into it. What is up, guys? My name is Ben Hartwell. Thanks for checking out the channel. If it's your first time here, or even if it's not, please consider smashing that subscribe button. It really does help out the channel. So, using a real amp with a Helix and switching between the two different preamps. Not too difficult to get set up. The difficulty lies when we still want to use pedals within the Helix that are both in front of the real amp and the Helix preamp, and pedals that we've got in the effects loop of the real amp and in the Helix preamp. Takes a bit of setting up, but I'm going to walk you through it. Disclaimer right off the bat, this setup does seem to introduce quite a bit of noise into the signal path. I've tried it a bunch of different ways, but it just seems to be the way things are, and it's just a bit of noise that we have to live with. It's not too bad, and I don't think you'd ever notice it in a band or mix situation, but it is a little bit annoying. So first things first, we need to set up our 4-cable method. Exactly the same 4-cable method as you've seen me do in some other videos. If you missed that video where I went a bit more in depth about the 4-cable method, you can check it up in the cards, but I'm just going to cable exactly the same way as I did in that video now. Okay, so I've got everything cabled up, connecting the Helix via 4-cable method to my Victory V30. The reason I'm using the V30 and not the JVM is it's a lot simpler amp and it's easier to show you what's going on rather than all the complicated knobs that are on the JVM. So the way that I set 4-cable method up with the Helix and a real amp, and I think is probably the easiest and quickest way to do it with the Helix, is I use both the quarter outs and I pan one left and one right, and I send one to the front of the amp and one to the effects loop. It's a really straightforward and quick way of doing it. We just have to change a few things in the Helix itself. So from the top down, hopefully you can see the Helix screen. Apologise for how dirty my Helix is. It's fresh from gigging last night and I hadn't had a chance to clean it, but there you go. Okay, so on the Helix screen, the best way to think about this is these two lines are completely separate lanes of audio, and we can send them to two completely different places. So I think of them as the top line being anything I want in the front of the amp, and the bottom line anything that I want in the effects loop of the amp. So to get that set up, we just have to go to the output blocks and change where they're going. So on that top line output, at the moment it's set to multi, which means it's sending out of everything that the Helix has. We want to limit that to one specific output to go to the front of our amp. So I'm going to set that to quarter out. I'm going to pan it all the way over to the left. So that now means that that line of audio is only getting sent out of the Helix on that left quarter out, and that is going to the front of the Victory V30. Okay, now for the output of line 2. At the moment that is also set to multi, so that's going out of everything that Helix has, but we want that audio to only come out of the right quarter out, which is going to go to the effects return of the V30. Okay, so that's our out sorted. Now we need to sort the in of the bottom line. At the moment that's not receiving audio from anywhere. You can see from the X that there's no input selected. So we need to change that to the input that we've got coming from the effects send of the amp, which I've got on return 1. Okay, so we've got all the ins and outs sorted in the Helix and the amp. As you might be able to hear, once we do set it up like this, we do get that noise introduced. From everything I've tried so far, there doesn't really seem to be a workaround to get rid of that noise. If you guys find one, let me know. But with the way we've got things set up at the moment, we should have sound. Cool, so that all seems to be working. The next thing that we need to do is get it set up so we can add a preamp in the Helix and switch between the preamp in the Helix and the preamp in the amp. So I'm going to set up a few pedals and get things set up, and then I'll talk you through it. Okay, so I've got everything set up. This might look a little bit complicated, but it's not as bad as you think. I'm going to talk you through it. So I've added a few pedals so that you can see what the patch is doing, and I can show you that it's interacting with the effects loop and the preamp in the Helix as well. So anything on this top line before this split that I've added can be thought of as going into the front of either of the amps, both the real and the preamp in the Helix. So I've added a Minotaur so I can show you what that's doing to the front of the dirty channel on the V30, and also the cleaner amp that I've got set up in the Helix. That then comes along to this split, and this is where we're doing the changing between the real amp and the Helix preamp. Now the difficulty with doing that change is that we somehow need to mute all the audio going to the front of the real amp and instead send it to our preamp in the Helix. Now I've tried to do this a bunch of different ways. The way I originally wanted to do it was to mute the output altogether and have it set to a foot switch to toggle it on and off. But that made some really weird, loud, squealing noises through the amp, so I don't think that's a goer. So the best way that I've found to do it is to use simple EQ blocks because they take up virtually no DSP, and we can kind of do the same thing as just a mute anyway. So as you can see, I've got two of them. They're identical. I'm not using the EQ at all. All I'm doing is rolling the level off to its absolute minimum. They're both assigned to this foot switch that toggles between the two. So when that top EQ is engaged, we're effectively muting that output path. And when the bottom EQ is engaged, we are effectively muting that second path that's sending to our preamp in the Helix. With me so far? Awesome. So by alternating between those two EQs, we're effectively changing which preamp we're allowing to be used, either the real one or the one in the Helix. If we have that top EQ engaged and we're bypassing that top lane of audio, there is no sound going to the front end of the amp at all. It's instead coming down to this other path via this split and is then going into whatever preamp we choose within the Helix. That line of audio then has to come down to this other line of audio because we need to send it somewhere. So it's coming down to what would be the effects send from the amp, which is now not sending us anything. So we're going to send the signal from the Helix preamp down onto that audio path through any pedals that we were using in the effects loop of the real amp, and then back out to the effects return on the V30. Sounds complicated, but it's not really that bad. Just think of it as all we're doing is muting anything really that's going to the V30 via the front end of the amp. And instead of us sending a signal to the Helix via the FX send from the amp, we're just doing everything in the Helix and then sending all that signal to the FX return. So all we're doing with the amp is using the power section. None of the front end of the amp is doing anything. The EQ, nothing will work other than that master volume. Then when we switch it back and we engage that bottom EQ, we're allowing the audio to go back through that first line and go back to the front end of the V30. And then it's just like we're using a regular 4-cable method and we're using the preamp in the V30, so then all our controls do work. The beauty of doing it this way is we can still put any pedals we want in the front end of the amp, so we can use wahs, compressors, gain pedals, anything we want can go on that first line, and it's going to affect both the front of the real preamp and the front of the Helix preamp. And we can have anything in the effects loop of the real amp. So any time-based effects like delay and reverb that we want to run in an effects loop to keep them nice and clean, we still can do that. And when we switch preamps, those pedals are still going to work in the correct way. So that's how it's all set up. Let me show you that it actually works. So with our bottom EQ engaged, we are running a regular 4-cable method, still using the front end of the Victory. Cool. We can add in our gain pedals. Our effects loop works. Cool. And then when we hit the multi-switch and we switch those EQs, we're now on the preamp in the Helix. So if I turn off that gain pedal, you can hear that our delay and reverb is still working. Any pedals in front are still going to work. And then just by hitting that multi-switch again, we're back on the Victory. Cool. And one of the nice things of having it set up this way is that we're going to get spillover because of the way we've got the effects loop set up. So if I turn up our feedback and mix on the delay, cool, so I've got a nice long trail there. If I start that trail going and I switch over to our other preamp, we're still going to get that nice trail from the delay and reverb through the original preamp in the V30, even though we've switched to our clean preamp on the Helix. Just like that. So there you go, a pretty cool setup and a really useful patch to have on your Helix if you want to run 4-cable method with an amp that you like one channel on, or an amp that only has one channel and you want a bit of versatility by adding other channels by using preamps in the Helix. Now, you don't have to use the preamp models in the Helix, I did for this one, but you could use the full-blown amp models, which I think probably do sound a little bit better. The preamps do seem to be a little bit flat and need quite a bit of tweaking to get them where you want them, but the amp models sound great just running through an amp and then using the power section of the amp to amplify them. Just try a few different ones and see what it is you like. Another really great thing about the way this patch is set up is you could use more than one preamp if you wanted to. You could have a whole pedal board of different amps, DSP dependent of course, and you could switch through them with different pedals, effectively turning any amplifier into a multi-channel amplifier using any of the amps in the Helix that you wanted. The only downside to this setup is it does seem to introduce that bit of noise, but it's just one of those things that I think we have to deal with. Like I say, I've tried a bunch of different connections and I don't really seem to be able to get it to disappear. It is a bit of a strange one though, because if we remove one of the cables, the noise goes away. Let me show you. So I'm back on the preamp in the Helix, so the front end of the Victory is not doing anything at the moment. You can hear the noise. And if I remove one cable, so I'm going to take out the cable that's going to the front end of the Victory, so that's not doing anything, the noise disappears. So that is a little bit of a mystery to me. I don't know why we're getting that noise, but I have seen some other videos where people have been using Helix in 4-cable method and they seem to get the same noise as well. So it must just be one of those things that we have to live with, and I guess it must be something to do with the way that the internals are laid out in the Helix. So there you go guys, 4-cable method with the Helix using both a real amps preamp and a preamp in the Helix, switching between the two whilst still being able to use pedals in front and in the loop, and it working with both preamps. Not as hard as you thought. Like I say, the only downside is the noise. So I hope you found this video useful. If you want to try this patch out for yourself, I'll leave a link to it in the description below. You can go pick it up, load it onto your Helix and see if you get the same results as I do. I hope you enjoyed the video and I hope you liked it. If you did, give it a thumbs up below. If you want to watch another video on my channel, you can do it just here. And don't forget to subscribe, you can do it right there. I'll see you in the next one.